On Sunday, we had the Spanish Grand Prix. Honestly, probably for me, it was the least interesting Formula One race I have ever watched. And now with that said, though, I want to be clear. Every race day for me, Formula One races air at 6 in the morning here in America for me on the West Coast. And when I wake up and watch a Formula One race, it feels like it's like Christmas morning. I'm like, even a bad race, like, not bad is the wrong word there. Even a less interesting race in Formula One for me is still awesome. I love watching Formula One. Now, to nobody's surprise, Lewis Hamilton won. This is his 4th year in a row winning the Spanish Grand Prix. He was just way ahead the entire race. I mean, literally, like, he was a pit stop ahead of everybody. He just kind of took off, and we never saw him again. And so I'm happy for Lewis Hamilton. He seems like a good dude. Hard to hate for me personally. But as a fan of Formula One, it's just not very interesting when Lewis Hamilton dominates the way he did. Now, Max Verstappen got second with Red Bull. Valtteri Bottas got third. And I want to talk about Max Verstappen for a minute because, first of all, Max does such a great job. And maximizing Max is like a funny nickname, but he does such a good job. Max Verstappen does a good job maximizing the performance of his car. Like, legitimately, you're like, wow. It's impressive how he always gets the best he possibly can out of that machine. Now, I want to talk about Alex Albon's strategy in a minute. But first, I got to say, Red Bull's pit stops, interestingly enough, were phenomenal on Sunday. Their best pit stop was 1.9 seconds with, I believe, Max Verstappen. Way better than Mercedes. Mercedes had a 4.3 second pit stop with Lewis Hamilton. Valtteri Bottas had a 3.1 second pit stop. Mercedes was actually kind of sloppy in the pit lane, in my opinion. But their car pace is just so far superior to Red Bull, it didn't matter. I just wish that those little things that Red Bull does right were actually things that had an impact on the race, because they do the little things right and still are nowhere near Mercedes. That's how dominant Lewis Hamilton is with Mercedes, because their car pace is crazy. Now, Valtteri Bottas did have another bad start in Spain. He had another bad start earlier where he kind of had that false start. I believe it was it Styrian? I don't remember which Grand Prix it was. He had a false start in one of the races. They decided not to penalize him because Valtteri Bottas just has had a weird time struggling to start races this year where, on turn 1, he got passed by not only Max Verstappen, he also gave an opening to Lance Stroll to get on the right of him and get inside and go around him. So it's not the first time this year, and it's maybe not the last, if Valtteri Bottas has been impacted by his start on the race. And it really made it so he constantly had to chase and try to get back into position. That's why Max Verstappen got P2 and Valtteri Bottas got P3, aside from pace, aside from other things. Now, I'm sure that Mercedes is still happy with Valtteri Bottas. He keeps getting podiums, and they're actually probably quietly thankful that, hey, like if you're Mercedes looking at Valtteri Bottas, you're like, well, he scores a lot of points, he gets podiums quite frequently, and also as a benefit, because he's not as good, he actually quite effectively stays out of the way of Lewis Hamilton. Yes, Mercedes is probably not as dominant as if they had a better driver, but a better driver would get in the way of Lewis Hamilton and cause problems. And so maybe very quietly behind the scenes, Mercedes is breathing a sigh of relief going, we got a perfect, he's just the right amount of good. He's good enough to get podiums, but he's not good enough to get in the way of Lewis Hamilton, thank goodness. Now again, this was somewhat of a boring race. I mean, by the end, only the top 3 cars, Lewis, Max, and Bottas, were even on the lead lap. Everybody else was lapped, which is like, not great. Now, Alex Albon, the other driver for Red Bull, needs to be better. Now, part of the problems that Alex Albon had were caused by his team and some poor strategy. But also, Alex Albon needs to do a better job and qualify faster. He needs to do a better job in qualifying and get farther up the starting grid. Alex Albon finished in 8th. He started in 6th, so he actually just lost 2 places during the race, which is not very good, in my opinion, when you're driving the Red Bull car, which has got a clearly good pace when you watch Max Verstappen. But I gotta say, to Alex Albon's credit, Red Bull really hurt him. He was kind of their sacrificial guinea pig at one point where Red Bull made Alex Albon do a pit stop very early, and they had him put on hard tires because Red Bull needed to test the hard tires to see if they had any grip on race day on the track. And it was valuable information because the hard tires were actually awful. And it was good for Red Bull to know because then they put Max Verstappen on the mediums instead. And that got themselves a P2. So good for Red Bull, good for Max Verstappen. The problem is that to test the hard tires, Red Bull completely compromised Alex Albon's drive. Again, Red Bull did what was best for Max. And the P2 helps Red Bull. Like, great, good job. But if Red Bull ever wants to challenge Mercedes, which maybe Red Bull's just conceded, hey, we're the second best team this year, we're not going to be able to push Mercedes. But if, in fact, Red Bull ever does want to push Mercedes, they need Alex Albon in P4, pushing right up behind the top three cars, trying to get a spot, vying for positioning. So I just feel very conflicted because maybe Red Bull, again, has just decided we're not going to win this year. We're trying to get second. We're trying to make Max Verstappen look good. But again, if Red Bull ever wants to push Mercedes, they need to not only have Alex Albon do better, they need to help Alex Albon do better as well. Racing Point took home P4 and P5. Lance Stroll was 4th. Sergio Perez was 5th after a 5-second penalty. Racing Point, to me, is very clearly the third best team on the grid in Formula One. And the standings reflect that. Even after losing 15 points, so 1-5, 15 points, Racing Point is third in the Constructors' Championship. The McLaren was very quiet in Spain. They are, in fact, 1 point behind Racing Point in the Constructors' standings. They are 4th. And in the Spanish Grand Prix, Racing Point, McLaren with Carlos Sainz got 6th place. Carlos Sainz got 6th. Lando Norris got 10th. So McLaren is right behind Racing Point. But imagine if Racing Point hadn't had 15 points deducted. It's very clear that Racing Point is not the same team they've been in the past. They're growing as a team. They're getting better. They're pushing harder. And I got to say, I was wrong. I've been very skeptical for a long time, waiting and waiting and waiting. No. After Spain, it's very clear. Racing Point is the third best team on the grid in Formula One. Now, Ferrari was a gigantic mess in Spain. They've been a mess all year. They were a mess in Spain. They've been a mess consistently. Ferrari's engine is awful. Their engine is just a gigantic... they're a midfield team that has a bunch of problems. They remind me of Renault last year. First of all, Charles Leclerc's engine literally just shut off mid-corner in Spain. You're like, how does that... What? He had to retire. His seatbelt was also broken, so... Red Bull's got, Ferrari has significant problems with their engine. It's not good. It's not pretty. And also the way that Ferrari handled Sebastian Vettel, it was alarming what they did with him. Their communication was terrible. They kept giving him some conflicting instructions where they told him to push flat out. And then 3 laps later, they told Sebastian Vettel to save the tires and try to go all the way with them. It's infuriating to watch because you're like, what is happening here? And my guess is that Ferrari's communication problems go all the way up to the top, probably all the way up to Mattia Binotto, where, Mattia Binotto is the team principal. And I got to say, man, Ferrari really, really annoyed me this weekend where Mattia Binotto, who is the team principal of Ferrari, came out and said that he wanted transparency with the Racing Point investigation. But saying that is completely hypocritical for anyone who works at Ferrari because in the offseason, the FIA, the governing body of Formula One, investigated Ferrari's engine. And ever since that investigation, Ferrari has been way, way slower. They look like a midfield team. So you wonder, okay, what happened? And guess what? The details of that investigation are completely private. We cannot see what happened in that inquiry. So where is Ferrari's transparency? Ferrari can call for Racing Point and the FIA to be transparent, but why hasn't Ferrari come out and said, hey, the FIA looked into our engine and this is what they found. We were cheating. We were doing this or that. So you can't call out someone for a lack of transparency when you yourself are not being transparent. That's completely wrong and stupid and hypocritical. And so I find Ferrari disorganized, annoying, hypocritical. They're probably my least favorite team on the grid just because they're so pompous and they're so, we're Ferrari, and then there's nothing to back it up. And they talk a lot and they're weirdly run. The more I learn about Formula One, the less and less and less I like Ferrari. Now, the last thing I want to say is this. I don't think that Max Verstappen, the Red Bull driver, gets enough credit for his maturity. I know a lot of people hate Max Verstappen from the Netflix series Drive to Survive, where people didn't like the way that Max Verstappen handled working with Daniel Ricciardo. People love Daniel Ricciardo. They feel like Max Verstappen didn't do him right. But I got to say also, Max has grown a lot in the 2 years since Season 1 Drive to Survive. He's only 22 years old. And Max is really the face of the franchise for Red Bull. He's like an NFL quarterback. And I think he always says the right thing. His interviews are phenomenal. And then mid-race on Sunday, he had this brilliant moment where he said to Red Bull, on the team radio, he goes, "Let's stop worrying about Mercedes out in front of us. We just got to focus on our race and control what we can control." And it's a good message. Max was right, because you cannot slow down Lewis Hamilton. I'm sorry, but you're not going to make the Mercedes go any slower. All you can do is get the most out of your car. And that's what Max did. That's what Max said. And Max got P2. So the more I watch of Max, I love Max. He's my personal favorite driver in Formula One. I get that people don't like him, but you also have to step back and realize Max is not the same person he was 2 years ago. And he's just growing as a person, as a driver, as a face of a franchise. Max is just the rising star in Formula One. And people that hate him need to maybe question and maybe try to look at how Max Verstappen has grown, because it's okay to be a different person now than you were 2 years ago. And I hope that people's opinion of him can change along with Max Verstappen, who also appears to be changing.